Good morning, everybody. Today is January 14th at 9:55 New York time. And what's going on with Bitcoin? Is this the turn of the trend? Let's talk about it. So, previously, what was going on with Bitcoin is we were in this bear wedge. We had this clear resistance, and we were saying that I might need to go and get a job at McDonald's again because if it fails at this resistance, it's not a good case. But what we can also see is that Bitcoin did find support at the 50-day, which is a good sign of accumulation. So buyers are stepping in and saying that they want to support the trend direction. We can also see that it lines up with the trend line of that bear wedge. And we can see that it was getting really tight down here. And when it broke out, just yesterday, it broke out with some pretty good volume. As you can see, the volume really picked up here on this day yesterday. And we broke out above this level of resistance. Now, you could draw the resistance maybe up here if you want to be a little bit cleaner or there. Doesn't really matter. But we can see that it found resistance right here. And today, as of today, it came back and it tested that resistance. And it looks like it is starting to continue its upward trend. So what does that mean? Well, we should be mindful that trend changes can happen. So even though we met everything of a stage 4, what we haven't been looking at is when does a stage 1 or a stage 2 happen? So for stage analysis, like we've talked about in previous videos, we have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. It doesn't necessarily always go this sequential order. Sometimes it goes from stage 2, it goes from a stage 4 to a stage 2. We could see that, that happened back over here. We had our stage 4, and then we went immediately into a stage 2. So that's just one example. There's plenty of other examples though where it doesn't need to have a stage 1 basing. Stage 1 basing is typically what ends up happening when there's an extended period of time where Bitcoin is just kind of going nowhere. So we could see that. For example, over here, we had a stage 1 base. You could see it was very sideways for quite some time. And we had this range. It broke down below, but it pulled back up. That was good. And then it got tight, and then it broke out to a stage 2. And this was coming off of a stage 4 decline that happened over there. So stage 4 decline, a little breakout, pulls back in, and then we start rotating above the 200-day. So doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have a stage 1 in order for it to go to a stage 2, but it's just something that can happen. So what are the two potential outcomes? So right now we are forming these higher lows, and right here we could start seeing higher lows starting to form. So before these were lower highs, and now we could start seeing higher lows. So it just means, are we going to keep going up or are we going down? Is this where the trend changes? This is what's called a pivot point, the resistance right here. This is the pivot point. If you were entering into Bitcoin, if you were doing a breakout, you'd be entering in right here and you'd be having your stop loss below here, hoping that the trend is just going to continue in this direction. So that is the pivot point. So what are we looking for this trend change? So like I said, this is what could be happening. So over here, this is a stage 4 decline. This is showing an example of a stage 1 base right here. There's a stage 1 base. The volume dries up. I'll just zoom in so you can see a little bit more. The volume dries up, and then I don't think that actually did anything. Let's see. Yeah, so you can see stage 4 volume dries up, and then towards the pivot point where that resistance is, volume would pick up, and then you'd have a pullback. You'd typically test that resistance, and then volume would pick up again, and it would continue its change of trend into a stage 2. This would be considered the stage 2A because this is the earliest point in the trend change that you might be playing as a breakout. So that's what we are potentially looking for. So I've got my checklist. I put my checklist into TradingView so you can see what we're looking for in regards to stage analysis and the trend change. So two different paths we could be looking at right now, and that we're trying to see. Technically three. Three is, are we going to continue the stage 4 decline? It very well might continue. I mean, we are still technically below the 200-day. This is very very early in the trend. This could just shoot back down, and we continue to go lower. That is a very real possibility. Second very real possibility is that this is a stage 1A early basing. So what do we have showing that this could be the early basing? This was the early basing area over here. So that was that reversal extension right down there. Maybe that's the only reversal extension. So that's that bottoming. The buyers step back in. They try to drive the price back up, and they say, no, we don't want it to go any lower than 80. Let's bring it back up. And then we consolidated here. Maybe this was the type of stage 1A. Maybe we weren't going to continue down. So, but reason why I personally don't think that this is the stage 1A is because really, if we're looking at the volume here, look at the volume and how volatile it was getting. I mean, there's some serious volume. Buyers stepping back in, sellers coming in, buyers stepping in. This is really high volume. This is more volume than was over here when we were getting that distribution. That was more volume than over here when we were in our breakout. This is really high volume area. So to me, that doesn't seem like that is a sign of volume drying up in a stage 1A. To me, this just more seems like people coming in trying to pick at the bottom, and then other people distributing and saying, no, we want it to go lower, and other people coming in and saying, no, we want to hold. And that's what that looks like to me. Price begins stabilizing, erratic but no longer plunging. So yes, it is kind of a stabilizing over here because we did find some support over here. Didn't want to go any lower than 80. So that was, and then 85 was that, and then, the 86 range. So price was beginning to stabilize. It was erratic, definitely was erratic, but it wasn't plunging any lower. One thing about early basing is oscillating around the 50-day. Was it oscillating around the 50-day? Well, no, because we had a very sharp decline of that 50-day. And right now it broke out above the 50-day. It tested it. So it was kind of oscillating around it, but it found it as support. I wouldn't say that it was oscillating. What oscillating would be this going sideways and then it just kind of chopping around. And then that I would say, okay, that looks more like a stage 1A. That's a stage 1 basing type of action. So again, you could see what oscillating looks like. This is oscillating. Another example of oscillating could be over here. That's oscillating around the 50-day. This is very clear oscillating. So that's what oscillating looks like. And that's just really hasn't happened yet. It could come back down, but that's not the case right now. Test fails to reclaim the 200-day. We are coming up, we still have a bit to go for the 200-day, about another 10%. If it finds that resistance at the 200-day, we could find maybe a larger basing. That could happen. But what we're seeing is higher low forms potential bottoming behavior. So, we're seeing higher lows. There was a higher low. There was a higher low. Maybe this is the lower high. 30 to 40 weeks starts to flatten. As you can see, it's still within that downtrend. It's still pointing down. This would typically need to kind of go sideways a bit more in order for this 200-day to really start to flatten. So we still are within a downtrend. and a clear range forms. Yes, we did see a range form right here. There's the range right here. So clear range formed. Stock is now trapped between support and resistance. So that is confirmation, some different signals for could this have been the stage 1A? I personally don't think that this was a stage 1A because of how sharp that was. Stage 1A would, the 50-day and the 20-day would kind of have to catch up, and then it would have to kind of go sideways. So this was still stage 4 behavior right up until around here. This is where it could potentially form that stage 1 area, but this could also just be from stage 4 to stage 2. So what are some of the signs for a stage 2? Price breaks out above horizontal resistance trend line on increasing volume. So we have this horizontal resistance trend line. This was some very clear resistance right here. And then we had that increasing volume. So that volume came in right there. We could see that there was some volume that came in on these days, but then it was met with some very clear resistance on the downside, but price shoots back up and broke above that resistance. Price holds above the 200-day. So 200-day, again, like we said, it's got quite a bit to go. Weinstein typically uses the 200-day, the 30-week, or the 40-week. It's all very, very similar to signal typically where that stage 2 is coming from. But what we typically see with crypto is because it is very volatile, you can have very big downside and then very big upside. So, sometimes these moves will happen well below the 200-day, like over here. But that doesn't mean that this isn't, the stage 2. This is just very early. And then you can see that it comes back up and it tests the 200-day and then it bounces right back and continues its trend. So sometimes the moves can happen below the 200-day. You don't want to completely forget and not even consider entering. It's just these are very early when you are entering below the 200-day. You're entering below the 200-day, but the trend is clearly in a specific direction going up. And sometimes it'll come back and test the 200-day. But if you wanted to get in early, you can typically get in below the 200-day as an early move. So that's just what's going on potentially right now for an early move. All right, so price holds above a rising 200-day. Like I said, still have a bit to go. Breakout may retest prior support or prior resistance, now support. The classic confirmation behavior. So we did see, as of today, it came back in and it tested it. And it bounced off that resistance and looks like it is starting to continue its trend higher. Again, I'd want to wait until the close of this day in order to say, like, okay, yeah, this is a clear retest and it's bouncing off. Sector strength confirms. So sector strength, this is going to be risk on assets. Our risk on assets confirming this trend is total 3 ES. So the alts, is that confirming the trend? Relative strength. So if we just look at, let's say, total 3 ES, we could see that there was nearly 100 billion that was added within an 8-day span. It came back in, and it looks like it was about 50 billion was removed, so very quickly, and then that 50 billion was added back in, and that's where we are with total 3 ES. If you were to look at where that money was flowing to, these are the top 10 alts. So you can see top 10 alts. That was 50 billion added to the top 10 right there. It pulls back in and going a little bit. And we can see over here, this was about another 50 billion right there for the top 140 alts. And pulls back in, and then it comes back up. So you can see that the smaller cap alts had a bit more money coming back into them as opposed to the top 10. So, and if we were to look at some other more macro indicators, if we were to look at the Russell 2000, sorry for the crying baby. If we were to look at the Russell 2000, we could see Russell 2000. It is clearly, money's clearly going into the smaller caps, and we can see that money has not been going into some of those top stocks, tech stocks. The QQQ is mostly focused on tech stocks. So yeah, tech and growth sentiment, where IWM, the Russell 2000, is focused on small caps. So it's more of a risk-on signal, and we could see that the small caps are, money's flowing into the small caps. So what does that mean for risk-on assets like Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is it's a risk-on asset. It would fall into similar to the Russell 2000. So we can see that money is a little bit more speculative right now. So the sector strength confirms it. I would say, potentially. Again, this is very early. And then relative strength line rises sharply. So if I pull up the relative strength here, don't know why it wasn't showing up. So relative strength. Here is the relative strength. So I'd say that's a pretty sharp rise. We had bottoming, shoots back up, comes back, going back up. Say that is a pretty sharp move. So is it rising sharply? Again, I'd want to see it a bit more. Again, this is very early. We'd want to continue to watch for that relative strength, see if it continues upwards. But yeah, I would say right now, very early. And if we're looking at some of the charts, and what is their behavior, so this is pulled from the PCT screener, the screen that we use that shows the relative strength of these different charts. We can see a lot of similar price action going on through all of these charts here. So most of them are below the 200-day. Forming this could be what is a higher low. So the higher low, we have this 3-touch trend line over here. And then we have a test of the high. And if it breaks out, that would be a trend change signal. And you can see that most of them are doing some of this price action. It's all very similar. So you just see what it looks like. Some of these are a little crazy, but again, these are more like power plays, and this is what I like to watch for, is these power play type moves. That's how I like to trade right now, is just looking for these power plays. But you can see what some of these moves are looking like right now. So to me, that does look like some early strength. And again, those are some of the outliers that I'm looking at. But I'm looking for a lot of confluence. So a lot of things moving at the same pace. A lot of power plays. These big 100% moves all happening at once, and then you're looking for this type of price action. So that's what's going on with Bitcoin. It looks pretty good. I would say if you are checked out because you got bummed from this sideways action and this move over here, this would be the area that you should be looking at and saying, okay, where can I get maybe some early entries, some pilots? Again, I'm not going super heavy right now. I'm just putting small tests out there because, again, this could very easily come back. You have too many positions open, and then you get flushed out. So for me, I want to build on top of my positions. I want a pilot to work. I want to then get a full position, and then from there I can start to scale up. But if you go too heavy too early, you can also get chopped up. And again, just look for those low risk entries, areas where you can get a sizable position with small, small risk, and then build up from there. So, yep, that's about it.